So, Caleb, welcome to the show. Take a moment to introduce yourself to everybody.
Hey man, thanks for having me, Andy. Excited to be here with you. I am Caleb Nelson. I am a radio geeky nerd guy. I'm a homeschool dad of 5 kids. I've been the one home with them for over 20 years. I've been married for
Goodness.
just over a quarter of a century, and those 2 points may indicate the situation on the top of my head. But I've been in the radio communications for as long as I can remember. I kind of grew up in the mid 70s, early 80s, where CB radio still had a hold
hmm
on the populace through television, movies, and whatnot. And so my dad had a CB, granddaddy had a CB, pop had a CB, and I ended up having someone give me one. It was my grandfather, and he had replaced one of his, and I brought it home, and I knew enough, even at 6, that red was positive, black was negative. And I took my dad's lawnmower battery, and he was curious about that a couple of weeks later. And I got the CB working in my bedroom, and we lived nearby the interstate, and I could hear truckers at the TA, and it just was a bite, and the teeth sunk in deep. And so from that point forward, I've been into radios of all sorts. In 2005, I was not looking to get into commercial radio, and I did, even working part time from home a lot of the time, still 40 to 60 hours a week for virtually no pay. It was a Christian radio station, which was fine. I
hmm
loved it, loved the artists, loved getting to know everybody. I quit that about 14 or 15. And at the same time, I learned about podcasting through Dave
hmm
Jackson and then Ken Blanchard. Didn't realize those guys were literally brothers from another mother, and made great friends with them, and realized at the same time they were just dudes who had something to say, and they didn't come from a radio background or anything. So I thought to myself, well, I really miss being on the air, and I love the format of a podcast. So I started podcasting about the amateur radio hobby. Again, another geeky radio thing. And what kind of started out like just a little side joke turned into this incredible movement. It was amazing to watch and be a part of. So I've been podcasting since 14, and I've done men's Christian shows, and my wife and I have done a show. I've got my youngest son has a show. I've got a couple other shows. And we're a communications media family, and we just love being able to connect with people through those different types of mediums.
That's very cool. You talked about your grandfather and your father having a CB radio. My dad went out and got this massive walkie-talkie from Radio Shack, and like I remember, it had this huge telescoping antenna on it. And when I pulled it all the way out, it was taller than me at the time. And I was told I could never play with it, but if we ever got in trouble, that was what we were going to use to talk to other people. And so,
Awesome.
and it ran off of like, I don't know, like 4 AA batteries or something like that. So I have no idea what the range was on it. But yeah,
Yeah.
like that was like a memory that I had. It was just funny that triggered when you were talking about it. And I didn't know what it was. I actually had to go back and look it up like maybe like
Right.
a month ago. I was like, what was that he had? Does he still have it? Because I kind of want to see it now.
Yeah.
And
But it
so
was
it was
help
like,
the
oh
home team.
yeah, it was on a CB radio, and it only had 3 channels on it, and it was just A, B, and C. And
Yeah.
I don't know which frequencies those were, but we had A, B, and C.
There you go. Well, I spent time working at Radio Shack in high school, probably sold a bunch of those. And generally, those were crystal controlled. So you could pop a crystal out and change a channel if you had a
hmm
local station that you guys, or a channel that you would monitor more closely. But yeah, man, that Radio Shack stuff, that was an institution we lost in the country for sure. And it's dearly missed, at least by my geeky family.
Oh yeah. No, I always like going to Radio Shack because they always had cool stuff. Now I have to go to like specialty places to find connectors and video cables and all that sort of stuff. I kind of hate it. But yeah, because I'm not going to pay a $200 increase at Best Buy for something that I can just pay easily for somewhere else. It's support a
Yep.
local business. So let me ask you this. You are currently, well, actually, before I do that, tell me about your current podcast and what you're doing.
All right. So, um, very long story short, I had to pause or stop my amateur radio podcast in 2018. My wife was diagnosed with a very aggressive cancer, and I was peaking at the time. It was great. We had an awesome run, but that stuff doesn't count when somebody's sick. So I just stopped it
Right.
all. And a few years later, she's healed. She's great. She's awesome. She's actually at work right now. And So we thank the Lord for that. But you get to the point where you are used to speaking to people in a certain way, an audience, and you just miss that. So throughout the time from 2018 into 2020, 21 too, my emails never stopped from listeners who would find my old show. And the
Mhm.
questions were always the same. It was like, well, what happens if the power goes out? Or which radio should I buy? Or do I really have to be a ham radio operator to keep up with my family? And I just mentioned one day to my wife, I'm like, I love talking to these people, but it's one at a time. It takes a lot of time. They're all asking the same questions. And Facebook was no fun because, somebody asked a really solid question and then they get all these snarky replies and
Oh, yeah.
you're not smart
Yeah.
enough to be here. Or if you get your license, you'll be able to answer this question yourself. I'm just not that guy. I just want to help. So my wife said, maybe you should start podcasting again, which was hilarious because she knows what it takes to create stuff and, keep going. And I really wasn't looking for that, to be frank. And I did. I started a show called Prep Comms. It was a URL that I had bought years ago because I thought it sounded cool.
Mhm.
And
And it does.
yeah, thanks. But I never wanted to really broach the preparedness field because there's kind of a divide there between the amateur radio hobby and the preppers.
Mhm.
And we can talk about maybe down the road, but I kept my first show really focused in the hobby. But this show, I decided, I've already done that. I've built that audience. I've made those friends. There's so many people asking the same questions in these Facebook groups and everywhere. I'm getting emails all the time. I want to speak to that audience. And Prep Comms was formed because of that. And it is a show about preparedness, but it's not like doomsday bunkers and,
Mhm.
rice and beans, band-aids and bullets. This is actually, we've been going a couple of years now, and it's a very slow walk. I'm building a library of content. So if someone does stumble into one of the shows, or maybe they search, what's the first radio I need as a family, or
Mhm.
or does an AM FM radio even work anymore? Those sorts of
Mhm.
questions. We're answering those and building this library of understanding to help people kind of walk into communications who didn't grow up like me with a dad who worked for AT&T Southern Bell, or didn't have a grandpa to give them a walkie-talkie CB or something, and maybe they didn't work at Radio Shack, or maybe they're too young to remember a telephone hanging on the wall with a cord. So the Prep Comms show is built to help an understanding, uh, present an understanding to folks who just haven't had that experience, and to help them understand that you don't have to be geeky and nerdy like me to do that. It's all out there. It's real,
Mhm.
and just like your phone, everything's a radio.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of the things. So I kinda stumbled into two-way radio after Hurricane Helene, and that was a big
Mhm.
wake-up call, I think, for a lot of people.
Oh yeah,
And so my wife showed me like, hey, she showed me something on TikTok. It was like this guy he was going out volunteering doing search and rescue, and there was this ham radio. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, that looks cool. It was just a little Baofeng
yeah,
little thing that he had. And so I was like, all right. She's like, you should get one. And I'm like, well, okay. And so that has taken off into just like now a hobby that I enjoy. And my wife just jokingly says, yeah, well, it's all her fault because she's the one who got me into this. And now, I don't know, like 10 radios later, here we are. And so, it's really cool to find a show like yours because there are people like me who are walking into it who don't really know what's going on. What are the
yeah,
rules? What are the regulations? What's the licensing stuff? What can I do in an emergency? And like I appreciate the fact that you come at this from a point of view of just wanting to help people because that's what I do with my show. I just want to help people with home security and all that
right.
sort of stuff. And it's like there's so many people out there who have questions. We just want to give them good answers where they can feel good about themselves and make their lives better.
Absolutely. And having a stint in Radio Shack back in the 90s through school, um, our slogan was, you have questions, we have answers.
That's
And I
right.
guess that just kind of, like the Boy Scouts, be prepared. I guess it just kind of sticks. And
Mhm.
there's just so many people out there just spewing answers and rhetoric and all this stuff that is not helpful. And you're not building community when you're just snarky, or
Yeah.
irrespective of someone else's ignorance. And that doesn't mean the person is stupid. It just means they don't know.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
so that's what this what the whole premise of this program is about. It's about breaking those barriers down and saying, hey, you don't have to know it all, but we're going to help you walk through this so that you can, in case of a Hurricane Helene or, a wildfire or a deep freeze, who knows, be more prepared, at least in that aspect of life, because when the phones stop working, people panic. I mean, it
Mhm.
was Christmas morning a couple of years ago that something happened
Oh,
outside of
right.
the AT&T building in Nashville.
Yep.
It shut all of that down. And this is a true story. I saw it happen on Fox News that morning, waiting on the kids to get up for Christmas morning. And I knew I had a friend, a radio friend in Nashville. And I thought to myself, well, I wonder if it got his phones. So I text, hey, good morning, Merry Christmas. No response, nothing. So
Mhm.
I went and turned on my ham radios and sent him a message. This is a true story. He came back and he's like, hey, good morning. How's it going? I'm like, is your phone working? He said, no, we have no internet, no telephone, no house phone, no cell phone, nothing. And I said, well, let me tell you why. And I told him what was happening
Very
from
cool.
South Carolina here to get up there
Mhm.
across the airwaves, no internet connectivity. And so, there's things like that. It's not that everybody's going to do that. Everybody needs to do that. But wireless communications, alternative communications, they're not hard. They're not hard to understand. But television's kind of warped the view. And then a lot of people just aren't helpful. So, yeah, all the way back to say, I love helping people learn how to communicate with alternate methods because in my opinion, it's a very important thing to have the capability of.
Right. So let me ask you, you kind of illustrated this, but like in the age of like text messaging and 5G and social media, does two is two-way radio still relevant?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned Hurricane Helene. We said that like maybe 3 times already. And so I live close enough to where the impact in Western North Carolina could be heard here at my farm from those radios. And it was one of the most awesome things to listen to, even going back and listen to replays of it because they exist. And hearing people who, like you said, maybe had just a walkie talkie from Amazon and knew just enough about it to put a frequency in and just call for help. And these weren't licensed amateur radio operators or firefighters or police officers. These were people who were trapped, in a mudslide or, on the side of the road halfway with a car in the river. And two-way radio works when other things don't. And a lot of the reason why, especially in regard to the amateur hobby and the hobby of communications, a lot of people build their own infrastructure. So when the cell towers do go down or when the power does go out, there are people out there that have these things built in. They're prepared for something to happen that doesn't normally happen on us, every day. And they're able to utilize the equipment that they've built and secured to make contact across different timelines. I mean, it's just two-way communications is very important. Although nobody talks about it because Verizon and T-Mobile have all the commercials on TV. So,
Right.
and
Yeah.
they do
Yeah.
work great. It's just when they
Mhm.
don't, that's when everybody gets scared.
Yeah, yeah. Verizon's buying up all the time so that like Midland Radio can't buy an ad in the Super Bowl, I
Exactly.
guess, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe that sort of thing. Yeah. All right. So one of the things that I've learned from your show recently is about all the different services that are out there. Kind of give us an overview of all the different radio services that we have access to.
Okay. Well, in the US, specifically speaking, we have a lot of different two-way type radio services we can use. So we're not talking telephones, we're not talking sat phones or stuff like that. These are things that you and your family could actually pick up, even some of them at Walmart or Target, and have a means of communication. So the most basic service, just finished this series on the show is FRS, which is the Family
Mhm.
Radio Service. And back in 1996, back in the 1900s, I tell my kids, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, opened up a set of UHF frequencies. So some of this stuff gets above people's heads, but some are listening that know. So it's a 440 some odd megahertz frequency band. And they gave us these frequencies to use. They channelized them and they put them inside little cheapy radios like this I think this is a Amazon, but this looks like a Target radio.
Mhm.
Um, and you can pick these up for $20 a set. And They're good for neighborhoods. They're good for the shopping mall. Maybe at the theme park, just depending on how big it is. Maybe you're tailgating with friends at a college ball game, or
Mhm.
even out at a campground. They're license free. You go to the store, you buy the radios. You better remember the batteries. And if you get the ones like at Target and Walmart, a lot of those are going to just eat through the batteries. So there's some better options online that have like a rechargeable battery pack and things. So um, but the guts behind these little, I got another one here. I like this one. The boys like this one better because
Mhm,
it's
mhm.
green. But they work just well enough to be able to keep up with your kids while they're in the neighborhoods on their bicycles, or maybe your kid's over at the neighbor's playing games, and he takes his walkie with him, and you guys can chat. That's the FRS radio service. There's no license. The radios are very inexpensive to utilize and to get into that service. Um, Again, you're thinking about neighborhoods. Imagine a bubble about the size of your neighborhood. That's about the coverage you'll get. So no external antennas, no accessories necessarily. It's just your walkie-talkie and the guy on the other end. The next one would be GMRS, and this one has really picked up a lot of popularity since COVID. Amateur radio really grew during COVID, and at the same time,
Sure.
GMRS did too. And GMRS, an easy way to say it is the radios we just talked about, the FRS. Just imagine those with steroids, because you're able to have more power. The frequencies, they even share some of the frequencies together in the services, but you can have more power. You can have radios made to put in your car with an external antenna, or maybe even a radio like a base station in your house that you can connect to an outside antenna on your chimney or something. And this comes with a catch. It is the radios are more expensive, although they're more powerful. But at the same time, you have to buy a license. There's no testing, but there is a $35 license that's good for 10 years and covers your entire household. And some even say that includes in laws and outlaws. So you'll have to decide how that rule reads for you. But GMRS is a great service. It is so popular now to the point that I hate to say this, but it's almost turning into the modern day CB radio, and that is good. And that may not be so great, depending on how you and your family decide to use it. And there's ways to kind of protect your family, um, not with what someone can hear you say, but how your radios receive other transmissions from people
Mhm.
that may be saying things that you might not want your 8-year-old to hear, possibly. But the GMRS is more powerful. They have towers in and around my area. There's towers up in the hills that can receive a walkie-talkie signal, and then they repeat it out over a much larger area. So you go from having the neighborhood type radio to that capacity, plus maybe your entire county, maybe your city center. These radios with more power do give you the options to maybe go to a larger theme park, or maybe the campground is bigger. You're at the beach, and you got kids on one end of the beach and you're down here on the other. So it gives you more capability, especially with the car radios and the radios you can use inside your home as a base station. Um, and then there's another one. This one's kind of this is it's such a weird spot. This next service, it doesn't really fit in between those, but it
Mhm.
doesn't really supersede either of those. And that's the MURS.
Mhm.
The government loves these acronyms, right? So
Oh,
this is
yeah.
the multi-use radio service. I've got radios that will talk on those frequencies here in front of me, but basically, I mean, you could get one of these and it'll work, right? So this is a VHF. All right, so I don't want to get ahead of anybody, but so the other radios we spoke about were 440 megahertz. These radios are around 150 some odd megahertz, which means this is confusing. And I know people, so just stick with me here. The larger the number, the smaller the frequency. So these frequency wavelengths with MURS are taller than the
Mhm.
frequency wavelengths with the FRS, which means that in a lot of cases it will travel further distances,
Mhm.
especially outside, especially through maybe across a couple of pieces of property. I live out way out in the country, rural, so these frequencies are perfect for us because we're flatter land and we have pastures and whatnot. It works great in that scenario. It works so good that Walmart, Target, Costco, Sam's Club, a lot of those can also use those frequencies. So if you live closer to a more suburban or urban area, the MURS, multi-use radio service, may not be the best choice for you because of the different industries that actually use the frequencies, such as the shopping centers and whatnot. And they're legal to do that, by the way. So it's
Mhm.
wide open for anyone who wants to get on there and use it, but they work great. And you can add antennas, you can add um, uh, height above ground on towers. There's all sorts of ways you can improve the output on these radios. It's limited to 2 watts, but if you put an antenna at 60 feet with 2 watts, you're talking. So um, I have long not talked about MURS at all because it's like the best kept secret in the preparedness world.
Mhm.
But I had to come clean with my audience on prep comms because it is such a great asset that I think everyone who's interested in a deeper level of alternate communications, you want to go past the two I showed earlier. It's a great place to go, especially if you're rural, for sure. And,
Okay.
and then CB radio. I mean, this is just like Smokey and the Bandit, BJ and the Bear, things, the Duke Boys. We grew up with this stuff, the A Team as kids. And the funniest part about it is these things are still going. And
Mhm.
even back when I was a kid, people used these illegal power amplifiers and they had huge
Mhm.
towers and
Mhm.
antennas everywhere. And you would hear people talking across the country, across the world. And you could do that because of the frequency that they actually use. So the signals will go further with higher power and elevated antennas, but it's still a valuable service. Most people don't want to spend a lot of time with it because what you can hear.
Mhm.
And there's things I don't want my 19-year-old to hear on
Mhm.
CB radio, but
Mhm.
if you've got one, I wouldn't throw it away. I wouldn't just hurt myself to put it in service. But if you have it down the road, if you needed an alternate, one is better than none. And there's always somebody listening on the CB radio. So, um, everybody's kind of familiar, and it's kind of like the backwoods kind of stuff, but it is very valuable and it can be used in an emergency, or even if you and your friends just want something different and you find them in your dad's closet and want to see how they work. So CB radio is great. And then there's it's what got me started. Honestly, I said that, and it led me into the amateur radio hobby, or ham radio, as people know it. Ham radio, HAM, is not an acronym. It's got 5 or 6 meanings that nobody really knows where it came from. It's just what we call it. And it's a hobby. It's a communications hobby. And some people look at you like, why do you want a communications hobby? I don't know. It's just fun for me. And the ham radio hobby is as broad as anything. Actually, an old podcast co-host of mine used to say it was a hobby of hobbies because there's so many different things you can do with an amateur radio license. So you do have to take a test. You do have to study and take a test. It does cost you something to have a ham radio license. It's $35 for 10 years. It's not hard to do. For
Mhm.
instance, my wife and eldest daughter studied from a Sunday to a Thursday and both passed their test. All but my 13-year-old daughter, and I've got 5 kids, including my wife, all have their license. My eldest daughter decided she wanted to one up her older brothers, so she has the same class of license I do. There's 3 classes. And so with the classifications, as you progress, you get more privileges. And a lot of people have a problem with the amateur radio hobby because you do have to pass a test, and the government does
Mhm.
say what you can and can't do. And you can't encrypt signals and all these things. But at the same time, uh, what I believe the advantages of the hobby outweigh those things, because I
Mhm.
can get on a radio and talk across the world with a piece of wire hung up in a tree at 8 feet off the ground and talk to Japan. I mean, well, I don't want to talk to Japan. That's great. But do you want to talk to your daughter in Portland, Oregon, when you live in, I don't know, Tampa, Florida? Well, ham radio could do that without the walkie talkies you see advertised, 9 million miles.
Mhm.
Those are
Yeah, yeah,
cell
yeah.
phones. Those are cell phones
Yeah.
with push buttons,
R
folks. So
Right. Yeah, the
don't
POC
believe the hype,
radios.
literally.
Yeah.
So be careful with that, because when the cell phone towers go down, those radios will stop working like that, and they'll work more like the baby ones we showed at the beginning. So amateur radio, ham radio, It is a great hobby. It's a great STEM activity. If you got kids that just have the knack
Good
for
point.
science, I
Mhm.
can't say that my kids do, except maybe one, but they've all taken the test and passed, and that's all it really takes is studying and taking a test. It's great for homeschoolers because it's one of those things that not everybody does, but it does bring some science into the homeschool classroom, which is one of the reasons I introduced it early. Plus, I love it, and I didn't want my kids to have an excuse. Well, I was driving and I didn't have a signal or my battery was dead. No, you're driving a vehicle that has a radio in it. So take those things away from your teenagers. It's a lot of fun sometimes. So, and again, going back to your premise, I mean, the security. So all of these things can add a level of security to your family. And at the same time, they may open your family up to some insecurities by nothing that we've talked about is private. So
Mhm.
when you
Right.
say it over the air, if someone's listening to that frequency, they'll hear you. But there's ways to do services that you can be involved with to get around that legally. But the fact of the matter is, communications, two-way communications, alternate communications, and in my estimation, are very important today. Uh, it doesn't take a lot to turn the nation on its head, to turn your town, your city, even your family. A diagnosis can turn your family on its head. And this is just one way that you can add to a solution in advance. And at the same time, I mean, what kid doesn't like a walkie-talkie? And guys that have kids are like, man, I remember these when I was a kid. And so, you're carpooling or you're traveling with family. You give the cousins one and you have one in your car. And
Mhm. Mhm.
it gets them off the screen and gives them an opportunity to communicate without the screen. So I went kind of fast through that, but the reality is communications, two-way radio communications are very resilient, and you can get involved at the $20 level or less, or you can be like me, and I don't even want to talk about the finances that we've invested in those. It's a lot more than 10. So I
Right.
may have 10, almost 10 here on the desk with me. But
Right.
but no, it's a great hobby. And if your kids kind of lean that way, you'll find a lot of astronauts who are amateur radio operators,
Mhm.
a lot of physicists, a lot of folks who work in those specialized fields of radiology and whatnot. They learn a lot through this type of training, and it's a great leg up, especially for the science leaning kids.
Very cool. Yeah, that is a good point to bring up. It is a good STEM activity, and,
Mhm.
maybe one day we can get schools back into it just to show them, something
Yeah.
else that they're doing. But what we've talked about Hurricane Helene a couple of times. That was devastating, and there's always gonna be some devastating weather event, earthquake, hurricane, wildfire, something like that that's gonna
Pick
happen.
something.
Yeah, I know, right, pick one. And so, or just like sometimes when, services go out, like
Yeah.
Verizon or AT&T just drops out for, a couple of hours. So how can we use a two-way radio in an emergency, and do we need to worry about licensing in an emergency?
Well, it depends on the emergency. So if it is my telephone won't call my mom at work and I want her to bring home Zaxby's chicken for supper, that's not an emergency. If you are stranded on your roof traveling down what used to be a small creek in the western North Carolina mountains, and you have a handheld radio and it's a life or limb situation, that constitutes an emergency and all bets are off. So the government understands that these tools are very powerful. And that is why there is licensing in place because of their power. But so you understand how to operate and move and go through these things. But at the same time, you need an understanding. But if you can power it on and make a connection with someone in the case of life or limb, then all bets are off. You can use them effectively to the best of your ability to call for help, to coordinate help. If you're on the bank of the river, we're talking Helene. If you're on the bank and you're watching somebody float down the river, there's no firemen, there's no police, there's no National Guard there, and you have a radio that can talk to ham radio operators in that instance, well, then you definitely pick the radio up and call for help and say, hey, I just saw Bubba go down the river on the roof and he's headed towards the bridge. Can we get somebody down there? And that's what they're all there for. The service is there to serve. And if you need it in its life or limb, then you're free and clear. If it's, I can't cross the road because there's a flood right here, but you could turn around and go 2 blocks and cross the bridge. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
not life or limb. It's not, doesn't constitute an emergency. I'm not gonna say you're gonna get in trouble or go to jail, You just
Right,
have to
right.
respect. You have to respect the things as they are, at least in my estimation. And but you can use them to in an emergency. I mean, there's been people I've known that have not personally but heard stories. They had radios that were capable to connect with Coast Guard helicopters, and they were
Mhm.
this is Katrina, and they were using. They weren't in the Coast Guard. They weren't in the National Guard. They were people who saw a need, saw the little orange bird up there, and they called it down, and they saved people's lives. That's life or limb. So
Yeah.
that's the quick, easy, not quick, but easy answer.
Yeah, and that's important to be able to have just one of those, even if it's just a little inexpensive radio, do your prep work beforehand, know what those frequencies are, because if you just talk into it, probably nobody's gonna hear you, and we'll kinda get into that here in a minute. But kind of, give me an outline of what my family's communication plan should be during an emergency.
Well, first you have to have a plan.
Mhm.
Most families do not have a plan. And because who thinks about an emergency? I mean, I'll be very frank with you. Helene, I had told my coworkers at the time I was working a job in town, and I kept saying, guys, I think this is going to be more than they're calling for us. And man, it's a hurricane. We're 4.5 hours inland,
Mhm.
and it didn't really seem like it would be that bad. I told my wife, I said, I'm really worried about Western North Carolina, Eastern Tennessee, because they have the propensity to flood with a lot of
Mhm.
rain. Of course, it
Mhm.
did, but not like we even anticipated at that level. So that morning, I get up about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. The wind has moved into my area. The rain is battering the house and the windows. I go into my living room, and I've got a ham radio there. I've got a scanner that works throughout the entire state, state frequencies and local frequencies. I'm involved in the fire department, so I had my fire radio and all these things. I have a little mini column set up right there, and I was ready, man. I was listening. I had the radar running, and I'm watching the bands come in. And I'm like, well, I'm here. If anybody needs me, just let me know. I'm ready to go. And so some of the ham guys had got up early and they're talking, and all of a sudden they went away. Well, what happened? And then it was 15 minutes later. We had no power for the next 7 days, and
Mhm.
we had a plan, but the plan had to change because the effects of the storm changed. So one, you have to have a plan. A lot of people, again, they just don't think it'll ever happen to us, or it's not important, or that's only what weird doomsday people do. But when your phones don't work, I mean, we are such a communication addictive society now. I mean, there are people who have serious emotional problems when they can't connect to what they're usually,
Sure.
connecting
Right.
to. They can't get on Facebook and post their status. They can't check something on Insta or see what even the news says. Their radar feed goes away. So that you take all these things away from people, and they a lot of times don't react well. So have a plan. And it's very easy to establish a plan. You look at what you have. So most families have a cell phone. A lot of times every person in the family has one. Okay. Well, let's just imagine that some of those or all of those stopped working. Well, what do we do? Well, I mean, I remember buying Susie a set of these when she was 5 or 6. I wonder if we can find them. I wonder if they have any batteries in them. And you start with what you have. So today, when it's not storming, it's not a hurricane in the Gulf or anything like that. Now's the time to say, what do we have at home that is a communications device? Well, we've got tablets, those have apps on them. We have phones that have apps. Even when the networks go down, those two can connect with each other through Bluetooth or wireless sharing and be able
Mhm.
to connect with each other and send messages from the upstairs to the basement or even across to the neighbor if it's in the right place. So you can establish things like that. And then do you have walkie talkies? Most families that have kids have walkie talkies. So find them. Even if your kids don't play with them anymore, get them and check the batteries. Buy some spare batteries. You don't even have to put the batteries in there right now so they don't just parasitically drain. And put all that stuff in a place that you know where to go to find it. Put it with your flashlights, or maybe where your fire extinguisher or your first aid kit is. And I'm saying this assuming that people have these things. So if you don't, I'm speaking to you. You need a first aid kit. You need a fire extinguisher. You need smoke detectors in your house. I mean, this is the protection show, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
have these things in place. So you have your phones and you have your tablets. If those stop working, you fall back or you cascade to the next item that works. And it may be these little kid walkie-talkies you have. Maybe you heard this program and decided to invest in something greater. But even if you've spent money and bought stuff, it doesn't mean it's going to work because you haven't practiced it. So you have to develop a plan that works with what you have now and then grow that to fit whatever your scenario is. And secondly, then you have to practice it, because it doesn't make any sense to have a box full of gear from Amazon. Maybe the batteries are dead. Maybe you didn't even buy the batteries because you get them later at Costco. And then you realize the storm's here and we can't do anything. Now you practice these things. And it doesn't mean that your family, puts on camouflage and blacks out their faces, with shoe polish and, sneaks around and spies on the neighbors at the barbecue grill. No, it's you're like, okay, somebody can go out in the garage and pretend they're at the neighbor's house, or maybe someone can go in the basement and talk to somebody upstairs and like, oh, well, I'm over at the park and I need somebody to come get me. There's a scary man here or something. There's a white van with a clown in it. Who knows? Not making light, but
Right.
But you have to practice these things. So you have to have a plan, then you have to practice it, because without practice, the plan's really no good, because you don't even know that it'll work when it's called on. And again, it doesn't take, you don't have to go to these rabbit holes, man. You don't have to get on YouTube and watch these videos of these snarky guys. No, I'm not speaking to you, Andy, but I'm just saying there's people out there that want to treat you like you don't know what you're talking about, even if you don't know
Mhm.
what you're talking about. So you want to learn from someone who can help and guide you. And like you've talked two-way radios before here, and we're talking them now. And so you learn how to progress through this and get an understanding. And the Bible says an understanding will help in a bad day. So you lean on your wisdom. You teach yourself now for the what ifs. And again, you don't go out and dig a bunker in your backyard. You don't have to go to Aldi and buy pallets of food. You can if you want to, but the thought process here is, what do we have? What can we use? How can we, build upon that? And then let's practice. And you don't have to practice every day. You might practice
Mhm.
twice a month, maybe the first Saturday of the month. You get it out and you purposefully do it. So you show your kids, hey, you remember to push the button on the side with your thumb, or remember we're on channel 3. And you build this into their memory so that they going forward, you take that anxiousness away, even from the parents, because moms ask
Mhm.
all the time, what happens if the phones don't work? Well, you need a plan. You need a
Very good.
plan.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
ants store up. So let's make plans. Let's get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, we practice, like your evacuation plan for a fire and things like that.
Mhm.
Kids do that at school. This is not unusual to do.
Yeah.
It's just like one more thing that you do. It's like, okay, we're gonna have a family fire drill. Where do we meet? All that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, while we're at it, go test the radios, go test the smoke alarms, and then you're done. You're off to
Yep.
soccer practice or wherever it is you have to
Exactly.
do. It's not a big
Yeah.
deal. So Caleb, what is your recommendation for a good emergency radio for somebody who's just starting out?
Yeah. I really don't think, I mean, if you're just bare bones, it's okay. Family of 7 here. I understand budgets. Go to Target, go to Walmart, check Amazon. There's some really great radios there that are legal to use without any licensing. Like we talked earlier, you might find them, dressed up like the Toy Story movie characters, or you might find some that are, Lego or Star Wars or whatever. And I found them at Hobby Lobby of all places, like a Michael's or a Joanne store. They had walkie talkies there. Blew me
Hmm.
away. Made me smile really big though. But you can find them anywhere. And those won't necessarily be the quality of, I'm going to drop this off the roof onto the concrete driveway to see what happens, but it's better than nothing. You probably already have some of these in your house anyway. Those are the FRS radios. Um, Again, no license, low power, neighborhood bubble kind of look out there, but that's where I would start. And if you've already gotten that and you want more, well, there's all sorts of things you can do, but the one thing you don't want to do is just to start blindly spending. A lot of people think you can
Hmm.
spend your
Hmm.
way into preparedness or spend your way into safety. And what you end up doing is buying a bunch of stuff And that stuff gives you anxiety or causes, undue pressures because it's sitting there staring at you like, what are you going to do with me? And you don't know. So
Hmm.
that causes this fear of insignificance and I'm not smart enough. Let us help you. And we can do that. We can help you develop a plan. That's what Prep Comms is for. I've got a webinar that's a Family Connect. We can talk about it if you want to later, but it's built for families who don't know where to start. But if you don't want to do any of that, go to Target, buy you a set of family radios. They're going to be pink, they're going to be rainbow colors, whatever. Get enough batteries to make them work. Buy a spare set of batteries because one is none. Because they'll go out just sitting in the drawer. Your kid will leave one turned on over the weekend, and you wasted
Yeah.
$12 of batteries. So, yeah, just start with something. Remember, your phone is a tool. It's a radio unto itself. It just doesn't look like one. So take care of your stuff. Screen protectors, spare batteries, those battery block chargers for your phone to keep those going in your tablets. I mean, this is stuff that you only think about when you go on vacation. You only think about when you take a flight. But in all those cases, you're leaving your house for something. Well, what happens if you had to leave your house because a tornado tore the roof off of it?
Hmm.
Or like some cases here in my local area, when Helene came through, there were some houses that had 12 to 52 trees on them. And just it was unbearable. Some houses were completely destroyed. Took people 6 hours to get out of the house. But what if you had to leave home and your phones weren't working and you were on foot or something? So it always helps to have an alternative. In the bare bones basic minimum start or the little cheapies from Walmart or Target for $20, FRS.
Very cool. So let's say I buy into some of the marketing and I purchase like the Baofeng UV5R off of Amazon for about $15 or so. What do I need to do with that radio in advance to have it ready to go for an emergency?
Well, you've bought a Bic pen, and Bic pens are great because they work every time. They're very inexpensive and then no frills, right? So you can't put your initials on them. They don't click. They will leak in your pocket, I promise. All of those things, right? So the Baofeng UV5 or Pofeng is, I think, how the Chinese say it, is synonymous in all these circles, and you'll see this radio everywhere, especially on YouTube. They are $16 a piece, which is incredible for the capacity and the capabilities of it. The problem here is for a lot of people, without spending maybe an hour or so on YouTube or reading a couple of blogs, you're not going to know what to do with it. And these don't come from the factory programmed with the legal frequencies these do. They'll operate here. You can use them here. It's a gray area. And I don't, I'm not a legalistic guy, so I'm not trying to go there, but these are not the easiest radios to program and set up for the typical family. Like they have enough to do. They're running soccer lines and school pickup and, play practice and church on Wednesday and Sunday. And they don't have time to sit around and do that's why I like the cheaper bottom end to start with. But if you do end up with one of those, it's not the worst thing ever. And literally within an hour or so, you can teach yourself how to program it and put the frequencies in there that your family can use, whether it's FRS or GMRS, and utilize those. The accessories are endless when it comes to that radio. It literally it took the entire market from a minimum of a $170 investment to get started, particularly in amateur radio. It took that in say 2012 to 13, 14 to a $35 to $16 threshold. And that has grown the hobby. It's grown a lot of things, some good, some bad. But yeah, if you have it, spend some time today making your plan. How do I program this thing? Because when it comes out of the box, unless it is labeled as a GMRS radio, it's not going to have those frequencies in it. And you run the risk of having some random frequencies from, the factory in China that just happens to be your local police department dispatch. And your kids unknowingly pick them up. You send them out with these radios unprogrammed out with your kids in the yard, and they're talking, and the police dispatcher hearing it, and they're going to not be happy about that. And that's illegal. So you
Mhm.
don't want to get your kids in trouble, don't want to get you in trouble. Again, they're not the easiest things to do. They make programming cables. If you're buying this radio for $16, spend another 16 to buy you a real programming cable. There's free software on the internet called Chirp, and you can utilize that Chirp programming software and a good programming cable to put proper frequencies in here for you and your family to use in an emergency or at the park.
Right, and you can go to a couple of different websites that will list off, what frequencies are what. You can look up all the GMRS frequencies. You can find your local repeaters for GMRS and ham, that
Yeah.
sort of thing. That would
Yeah.
all kind of be stuff that you would want to go ahead and have programmed into that radio, ready to go for that
Oh,
emergency,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah. You don't want to wait to do anything in an emergency except make
Mm,
sure your kids are ready to
right.
go because you guys have developed a plan, because your family has practiced that plan and they know where the stuff is. That's the only thing you want to do because when an emergency happens, I'm telling you, like where we were, we had 4 hours of 60+ mile an hour winds at my house,
Hmm.
4.5 hours off the Atlantic coast, and about an hour and a half southeast of where the storm impacted the Asheville, North Carolina area. And we're out trying to get the generator running because the power is gone. And we did not secure the back door. It's my fault. I wear it every day because it doesn't close anymore. It nearly ripped the storm door off the hinges. And it was just one of those things that you think through and you're like, oh, we got to keep the door closed. But we didn't close it all the way and it, got blasted. So now I have to buy a new door. But it's not not something you necessarily practice for, but it's, just forward thinking next time. But if
Hmm.
you practice today, you're ready tomorrow.
I like that. Practice today so you're ready tomorrow. So, Caleb, thank you so much for
Oh, absolutely.
talking with me today. If people want to know more about you and your podcast, where can they find you?
Prepcoms.com, prepcoms.com. Everything's there. We got a great blog, podcast episodes, former shows, basically the history of what we've done over the last decade and a half on the internet is there. And it's a great place to start. You can start episode 1. We're going to talk mindset. We're going to talk planning. And we're going to talk about telephones with wires connecting the handset to the phone in the kitchen that stretches across and
Mhm.
how we've changed since the process. So, yeah, prepcoms.com is the place to visit.
Very cool, man. Thank you so much for what you're doing and how you're educating people. God bless you, buddy.
It's absolutely been a pleasure to be here with you, Andy. Thank you.